Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Dukas, and I direct the program in Medical Ethics and Human Values here at Tulane University. And you are here to attend the J.R. Williams Senior Class of 31 Endowed Lecture, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, His Life, Work, and Relevance to Bioethics by Dr. Mary Lynn, Dell. Before we do that, I'd like to go ahead and present some background on the J.R. Williams Fund, because the family has been so gracious to create this endowment during the last 2 decades. It was initiated in the fall of 2013. The endowment specifically supports lectures in spirituality and health, focusing on the art of creating a compassionate and trusting relationship between patient and doctor. The series honors the legacy of J. Richard Williams, a Tulane University School of Medicine graduate who is a well-known and well-loved internist and oncologist in Selma, Alabama. And Dr. Williams was known as a physician who loved medicine and was the kind of doctor who would do anything for his patient. He specifically had an interest in the impact of spirituality on health. You have to remember, during the mid 20th century, much of oncology, unfortunately, was palliative care rather than curative, particularly on the positive impact of spirituality on the well-being and continued health of those who have suffered the loss of a loved one. I'm now going to turn this next couple of slides over to Dr. Stephen Hansen. He will talk on the Master of Science in Bioethics and Medical Humanities.
Thank you, David. I will not take much of your time. The Master of Science in Bioethics and Medical Humanities is a co-sponsor of this talk, and I'm very happy to be able to tell you just a little bit about us. But if you want to know more about us, we are easily available, tulane.edu/bioethics. You can see many of these prior talks and other things that we've done on YouTube. Just search for Tulane Bioethics. And so I'll talk a little bit, but that's how you can find out more. Next slide, please. So we have a master's program where we study 2 different tracks, both bioethics and medical humanities. And you would focus on either the bioethics track or the medical humanities track, although in either case, you would end up taking some from both disciplines. We have a bioethics track that focuses primarily on training in teaching, research, and service around the ethics that are relevant in the clinical setting, especially. So hospital ethics committee, institutional review board service, or teaching in any healthcare setting, whether it be a hospital, at the medical school, or elsewhere. And of course, conducting research, either normative or empirical, in bioethics. The medical humanities track trains more in the art of knowing, teaching and research on the issues where the humanities and medicine intersect. So talking about narrative, history, literature, film, and both the impact that this has on medicine, the impact medicine has on them, and also the way that they allow us to understand the practice of medicine as not merely a scientific thing, but in fact something that is richly humanistic. Next slide, please. We have a wide variety of ways that you can study with us. The program is offered in a traditional 2-year format. We have an accelerated 1-year format. At the end of either of those, you would end up with the Master of Science in Bioethics and Medical Humanities. For students who are interested in dual degree, medical school and an MS, we have that option, Tulane School of Medicine, and it takes no extra time. It's still the 4 years through medical school. Will be no extra time to achieve both the MD and the MS at the end of those 4 years. We also can, in addition to the 1 year and the 2-year program, we also have a part-time availability so that people can take more than 2 years if people are coming in as a practicing professional and want to get the master's degree. And if you don't want a full master's degree, but you still want some training, we have graduate certificates. We have one in clinical ethics, one in research ethics, and one in medical humanities. Conversely, if you take a certificate and you find that's really whetted your appetite, you can build on the certificates to take those credits and turn them into a master's degree with just a few more classes. Next slide, please. Like I said, I don't want to take up any more of Dr. Dell's time. Here is, if you want to take a quick shot of the QR code, that'll take you directly to us. Or if you don't have your camera ready to do that or not ready to do it now, just remember tulane.edu bioethics is us. And of course, you can also contact me or Dr. Offengenden. We are both, work to help direct the program, and we will be glad to answer any questions that you might have about our Master of Science program. David, please take it away.
There we go. So I will be doing the introduction of Dr. Dell right now. Mary, I'm going to stop sharing so you can put your own PowerPoint up while I introduce you. Dr. Mary Lynn Dell, who's got both an MD and a doctorate in ministry, is currently an adjunct professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences and instructor in pediatrics at Tulane University. An ordained Episcopal priest, she currently chairs the APA Caucus on Religion, Spirituality, and Psychiatry, co-chairs the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Ethics Committee, and was the founding chair of the AACAP Committee on Religion and Spirituality. She graduated from the Indiana University School of Medicine, where she also completed a general psychiatric residency, then completed a child and adolescent psychiatry fellowship at Emory, a research fellowship at NIMH, and served on faculties at Emory, Penn, George Washington, Case Western, and Ohio State University. She maintains ABPN certification in general, child and adolescent, consultation liaison, and forensic psychiatry. Dr. Dell's theological education was received at Emory's Candler School of Theology, the Virginia Theological Seminary, and Columbia Theological Seminary. Her clinical and academic interests also include chronic and life-limiting medical illnesses in children, adolescents, and transitional age individuals, psychiatric care of adults living with historically pediatric conditions, cystic fibrosis, epilepsy, and other neurological conditions, medical comorbidities and autism across the lifespan, bioethics, and medical education. Dr. Dell will be leaving New Orleans in mid-September to accept the position of Chief of Child and Family Psychiatry and Professor of Psychiatry, Neurobehavioral Science and Pediatrics at my alma mater, the University of Virginia, and the UVA Medical Center in Charlottesville. I'm also told to remind you all that for MDs, RNs, etc., for CME, please go to the chat and put in your name and your email. So I'm very proud to present to you Dr. Mary Dell. Mary?
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. And I especially want to thank not only the program in medical ethics and human values, but also the Williams family for their visionary support of opportunities like these. So I'm going to try something that's a little new from my part, but that I've been doing the thinking about. And that is to think about the work of Archbishop Desmond Tutu and its relevance to bioethics. So as a psychiatrist especially, we pay close attention to disclosures. I think most of them have been given. They are listed on the slide there. So Archbishop Tutu was born in 1931, and as most of you may remember, he died the day after Christmas in 2021, so only about 9 months ago. And to the right is one of my favorite pictures of him, where he looks dignified, appropriately dignified, but you can see that smile. So here's where my interest began with his work and his theology. I want to take you to Alexandria, Virginia in January of 2004. My husband and I were living in Alexandria from about 1999 to 2005. We were newlyweds, and both of our children were born there. During that time, a relatively large membership congregation. Some of you might actually recognize this building. This is Christ Church in Alexandria, Virginia. And it's an Episcopal church, part of the Anglican tradition. We were married there, we attended there, we're active there. And I actually was volunteer clergy there during our time in Alexandria. During that time, the collective we at the church on staff received funding from the Lilly Foundation, and I was privileged to help out in the development of essentially a 2-year residency program for relatively new graduates of theological seminaries, and where they would, for the first 2 years after graduation from seminary, they would rotate through the different departments of this congregation. So there would be one on worship, one on administration, education, community involvement, and liaison. You get the picture. It was actually kind of fun for me to put that together. A large part of it was transposing the parts that really work well of the medical education model, postgraduate medical education model, into that practical theological framework. And by the way, let me say this, I meant to say this earlier. The other part of disclosure that's important for this is that I grew up in a conservative Protestant family. I am now an ordained Episcopal priest. This talk is about Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who, as you're aware, was from in the Anglican tradition. So while those are our backgrounds from the Judeo-Christian background, the spirit of this talk and the whole premise that there's application to bioethics is because of shared values, shared ethics among all major world faith traditions. There's a corpus of values that are principally shared. And then also a corpus of virtue ethics that even in secular traditions or by folks who do not ascribe to a particular world faith tradition or even believe in God, that there are shared values that humans and humans who care for other humans normally subscribe to. So back to Christ Church, as part of this program, the first few years, the first round, there were 4 individuals who were enrolled in this. And these were seminary graduates of different ages, most of them second career. And one of them was Tutu, Archbishop Tutu's 4th child, has 1 son and 3 daughters. And actually the 3 women are all Anglican priests. So and I, we became friends as everyone was within this program. For those of you familiar with the Anglican Church, what you may know that is that there's, for the most part, kind of a typical progression in that you graduate from seminary, you get the theological education, and then there is an ordination meaning a service, a process whereby those that you serve in the congregation honor, recognize the start of your service and ministry. So there's an ordination to the diaconate. It's called the transitional diaconate. This followed 6 months or more soon thereafter to ordination for full priesthood. And so lo and behold, and this, by the way, is the inside of this particular congregation. This plays a role in a minute. On January 17th, 2004, all 4 people in this program were scheduled there at Christ Church for ordination to the priesthood. And when one of their fathers is Archbishop Desmond Tutu, that means that he gets invited to be one of the chief presiding officiants. So in the spirit or during that service, it's traditional for the presiding officiant, and that was Archbishop Tutu, to have what's called a chaplain. And basically that just means an ordained priest that holds his Bible, holds all the bulletins, holds his notes, and in his case, as being a very emotive man, a whole lot of handkerchiefs. And you follow him all the way up and down. What you may not be able to appreciate is there's a lot of stairs there, and a lot of places. And Archbishop Tutu, that man could really move. He scurried all the way around, bopped up and down. It was very interesting. Well, I was designated to be his chaplain. One of the reasons being that they said I was used to managing emergencies in the emergency room. And so if things blew off the altar or other crises happened up there, they thought that I might be able to keep a straight face and handle it. Well, that was all well and good. Then about 7 to 10 days before this event, our son, who was 11 months old at the time, became very, very ill and was hospitalized. This rehearsal for this service was the evening before he was to be discharged. And there was no way I was going to go and leave him in the hospital, but he was doing so much better. We had confidence in the team. Actually, he was ready to be discharged. But basically, my husband and kicked me out, said, no, hospital's closed. You got your pager, this is a once in a lifetime thing. You go. So I did, with a lot of misgivings. During that rehearsal, as I was holding things for him, Archbishop Tutu noticed that I had the wristband on. And so all the way through that rehearsal, when we were supposed to be paying attention, I thought, he was talking throughout the sides of his mouth, wanting to know all about our son, what was wrong with him, and inquiring about how I was doing, how I was handling the hospitalization, being both a physician and the mother. And it was just an amazing experience. Here, I actually just found these last week. What you see here on the left is a picture of Umpa blessing her father. This was immediately after the ordination was completed. And then over here on the right, you can probably, I'm standing there beside Archbishop Tutu, and you can see that wristband. And he picked up on that, very observant. And you can see Umpa kneeling right there in front of us. So with Archbishop Tutu's death last Christmas, this experience that I had with him has of course remained in my mind. And it's one of those things that I really wanted to reflect on, but you get busy and don't have the time. And so I'm grateful for the invitation to be here, because preparing this has let me do some reflection on that experience, but in the context of being a physician, a mentor, a teacher, and a perpetual student trying to improve patient care. So I put together some significant dates in actually in South Africa. They call them the Arch. But in terms of Tutu's life, he was born in 1931. He actually came from a relatively poor family. Both his parents were teachers, but that did not bring in much money. He had two older sisters, and he also had an older brother, but the older brother is deceased. His childhood and adolescence was affected by a few things. He was hospitalized for 20 months with tuberculosis, and he actually contracted polio before that and was in an accident where he received some burns. He was accepted, believe it or not, to medical school. That was his first choice for a career, but could not afford the tuition. So he went into teaching. He earned, he worked constantly, a number of jobs. He was even a choir master at one point in time. He received his seminary education, is listed living a period of time in London after his marriage. His children were born during that time, or at least most of them were born during that time. He came back to South Africa and was teaching pretty regularly at various seminaries, but then was called back by the Theological Education Fund, which was an arm of the World Council of Churches, and worked in London, and then went back to South Africa, where he rose very quickly through the leadership ranks of the Anglican arm of the Anglican Church, the arm of the Anglican Church in South Africa. Notice in 1979, he received an honorary degree from Harvard, and throughout this time was when he was engaging in his community work, his boots on the ground experiences of being in the villages, being, bringing rest, leadership to various uprisings, or he didn't lead the uprisings, but he would go and minister to areas, to towns, to far reaches in Africa and other parts of the world that were experiencing unrest and various forms of persecution. In 1984, he happened to be in the United States lecturing at General Theological Seminary in New York when he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, which of course he gave that money right back and invested it into scholarship money. The other work that he's known for is that he headed the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. In 1995 being a significant year as he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. And he actually spent several of those years in Atlanta. A couple of his children lived in Atlanta, and he was at Emory. Over the last 20 years, he says he kept trying to retire from public life, but much of the corpus of his work that we have to refer to now, the traveling, the speaking, the writing, the awards, came in the last 20 years. And he also had what he considered to be ministries, his expressions, his thoughts, his pastoral guidance on all kinds of issues, many of which have their parallels in bioethics, such as the role of women in professions, LGBTQ, the HIV/AIDS pandemic, child trafficking, legalized assisted dying, which he was in favor of. He was one of the first to speak on climate change, and also was involved with some COVID-19 work prior to his death the day after this past Christmas. So what was he like? Well, even in the 36 hours that I was in contact with him, I found these words, and you'll find these words throughout all the writings and all the acknowledgments of everyone that really knew him and worked with him and were mentored with him. He loved, he prayed. I have a story for another time about his prayer before the ordination service on the 17th of January, 2004. He was joyful, he laughed, he was common. And indeed, that's one, I think, of the keys of the power, the transcendence of his work, and why it is been embraced by people of all faith traditions, and even those who do not consider themselves to be religious or spiritual. He was intellectually gifted. He was interested in everyone. During that time that we were kind of bopping up and down across the front of the sanctuary at that rehearsal, he was asking everything about my son. And he said, well, what's wrong with him? What symptoms did he have? Why did you take him to the emergency room? And he said, oh, he was limp. What was his blood sugar? And I said, it was 26. And he looked at me like, oh, how can you live with 26? He wanted to know, well, what caused it? And I said, well, we found out that he had a virus. What virus? And so these were the whispers that were going on in between, when we were supposed to, I thought, paying attention. But after all, if Desmond Tutu's talking to you, you need to answer his questions. But he was just very, very intellectually curious. He worked hard. Now, he also had a sharp tongue, which he used fairly judiciously. He spoke as he believed that he was called to do, but he was rooted in his faith and beliefs. And I think when you consider individuals, whether it be like, I was trying to think of others, the Dalai Lama, Elie Wiesel, other leaders of universal proportions, one of the reasons that they can and do speak to so many people worldwide is because they are so rooted and so connected from in their own original faith tradition, their own original community and belief system. So, of course, when people think of Desmond Tutu, then it's natural to think about his contributions, especially in the political arena, or they are manifested in the political and international arena on diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And again, what's universal in everything that Tutu said and wrote, and what people say about him, is that he, in and of himself, was basically apolitical. He was not a politician. He didn't want to run for office. He came from a place within his faith, and when he saw incidents, people, problems, issues around him and in his world that he felt directed by God, his God, to address, he did. If that happened to be in the political realm, fine. If it happened to be in education, that's okay. If it happened to be in a family situation or within the churches he pastored, he spoke where he was called. One of his disciples, and actually Wilma Jacobson was the first Anglican woman ordained by Tutu, said Desmond Tutu has always and is still always unequivocally clear about faith and justice and equality and inclusion, that God is not a man, God is not homophobic, God is not a Christian, And all human beings, all people, all are made in the image of God. And again, in that observation, which actually is a paraphrase of many things that Tutu himself said, you see that his inclusion and his views on equity are rooted in that everyone is equal, that there is not a hierarchy based on gender, based on religion, based on anything else. All human beings are equal. And in Tutu's thinking, his belief system, because he was a Christian and Anglican, people are human because they are made in the image of God. We live in a universe marked by diversity as the law of its being and our being. We are made to exist in a life that should be marked by cooperation, interdependence, sharing, caring, compassion, and complementarity. We should celebrate our diversity. We should exult in our differences as making not for separation and alienation and hospitality, but for their glorious opposites. The law of our being is to live in solidarity, friendship, helpfulness, unselfishness, interdependence, and complementarity as sisters and brothers in one family, the human family, God's family. Anything else, as we have experienced, is disaster. So while on the one hand, this seems like a rather lofty content to the quote, this really is the basis of the Tutu ethic for addressing the issues of DEI and justice in each and every discipline, in each and every setting. Within this, you see many of the principles that at least us as educators, for instance, when we are first introducing the idea of principles, of virtue ethics, of the ethics of caring to our students, and when we think through approaches and mindsets to problems and to issues that come up in a clinical setting, this is very compatible with many of the accepted approaches, the common approaches that most of us do take into the clinical bioethics realm. So again, there are some people that transcend faith traditions, and what's interesting is that Tutu and the Dalai Lama, they were best buddies, and there are numerous pictures of their many encounters over the years. And there you see Tutu, one of the many pictures have captured of him literally dancing in his seat, a very joyful man. One of the issues close to his heart was the Holocaust, and indeed Middle Eastern relations forward. Here's another former Nobel Peace Prize, Jimmy Carter, with Archbishop Tutu in Jerusalem. And what you see at the bottom of the screen there are raised letters that come from two of the concentration camps where many Jews and other marginalized individuals perished in the 1940s. And here's another quote from an address that Tutu gave at the United Nations World Conference Against Racism. And I want to point out something in the second paragraph. So, you know, he gives this first paragraph, which is another Tutu-esque statement about the ills of racism and what it does to the human spirit. But in the second paragraph here, it says they thrive within the intersections of race, caste, color, age, gender, sexual orientation, class, landlessness. So again, there was he was always mindful of economics and poverty and the roles that played in ethics and in how we treat each other, the ethics of caring, ethnicity, nationality, language, and disability. So this was in 2001. What we know is that in the last 5 to 10 years, with some taking a little bit longer, disability theology and disability ethics has really come into its own. But this is 2001, and it was just totally almost automatic that Tutu had paid attention to this, was including this in his considerations of who is excluded. In his tradition, who comprises the least of these that should be included in humanity's efforts to recognize and be more welcoming of all kinds of diversity. Also, what is not as well known perhaps is that Tutu was on the climate change and its deleterious consequences quite early on. So here are pictures of former Vice President Gore and Archbishop Tutu talking concerns about the climate and the environment 14, 15 years ago. Now, in picking or in selecting, trying to pull out other kind of themes to think about today, because again, anyone that the meaning and the history and the application of any of these slides, you could write a dissertation on. But in reviewing the corpus of works available right now, both written by Tutu and then starting to come out about him by people close to him, there are a few themes that I want to note that have relevance to healthcare, the way we treat patients, the way we teach, the way, even if we're not in healthcare, the way we interact with students, families, each other, our colleagues. And one is known as Tutu's theology of Ubuntu. So Ubuntu actually is a stream of thinking in the African nations, most likely from South Africa, where Tutu was from. And it's described by Michael Battle, who is a theological professor, Episcopal priest, actually African-American. He's from the United States, but spent time working with Tutu in South Africa. He describes Ubuntu as the freedoms of individuality and community that are so strong in African culture that you can't tell them apart. It means that human beings need each other to be human. Ubuntu provides an African worldview in which human and divine identity may find mutuality in concepts of community. So basically, what that means is that there is no I without we. That all things are about the community. An individual is only fully individual when they are totally in community. This makes a fair amount of sense that Tutu would have embraced Ubuntu as a key component of his overall world theological view for several reasons. But one is that it developed in the area of the world where he grew up. Tutu's family valuing education, but also being poor at various times in his childhood and his adolescence. The children in his family would actually stay at some of the monastic communities in the area, like during the week, because they happen to be closer to school, so it saved money on transportation, those kinds of things. And especially the months when he was hospitalized with tuberculosis, he was visited and really influenced by several individuals who he calls his mentors, who were from monastic communities. And when Christian monasticism, as in probably other forms of monastic equivalents in other major world faith traditions, the idea is community, that the only way to really know God is that you see God and experience God, the divine, the transcendent, in other people. Another area that people may, again, I've touched on it, but that people I don't think fully realize or appreciate, but I would commend, has a wealth of really valuable information and inspiration for us as educators. And I know that almost everyone probably listening today has a role in education on some level and for many different populations of students, as well as we are all perpetual students. But Tutu, again, he was a teacher before he went to seminary. And during especially the first 10 to 15 years of his formal ministry, was actually deployed or assigned to sections of his home church, his home faith organization that dealt with not only theological education for those going into professional ministry, but also those that educated people for hospitals, those that had authority or open, kindergartens, primary schools, secondary schools, etc. So one of the keys or some themes to Tutu's views on education, he expressed when he addressed the Theological Education Fund in May of 1975, that it was an outgrowth of the World Council of Churches, a huge organization for those of you not familiar with it. In a way, it's kind of like a theological equivalent, or not exactly equivalent, but if you can imagine, what would the World Health Organization look like for different faith organizations in many different countries? They got together and wanted to make like a United Nations or a United Theological group of churches, theological organizations. He was in charge of the Theological Education Fund, and he said our seminary graduates tend far too often for comfort to be elitist, uncritical, conforming, and authoritarian. And so that statement right there, I've actually seen in the medical education literature as challenges or reminders of our responsibility, for instance, as educators in medicine in graduate school. We need to be aware that there's a risk that as education increases, Yes, it opens us up to new frontiers, but there's the risk that we can be perceived as being elitist or even authoritarian, kind of like, well, we have these degrees, and so we must know best. His two areas of concern as part of that were, number one, spirituality. And I won't go into a whole lot of detail about that right now, because in this particular address and then years later, he immediately starts talking about Christianity and the role of the Christian church. Again, that's all important. A lot of it is applicable to other faith traditions. But suffice it to say that he saw education, ethical education, needed to be rooted, let's say, in the values that spirituality can foster. But then also, he was concerned that those in education maintain critical awareness. And here's what he said about critical awareness. Critical awareness, which has a passion and a reverence for truth, and will not be cajoled or threatened to believe something to be true unless it recommends itself as the reasonable thing to conclude on the basis of the available evidence. So, you know, I had already graduated from medical school before evidence-based medicine started appearing in nearly every publication. And this was before that. So here we have a clergyman, a theological educator, talking about evidence bases in 1975. It will make them ask awkward questions and not be merely conforming, and only thus can they ever hope to be creative. Only those ready to challenge the existing orthodoxies have ever advanced men's knowledge. And again, this is 1975. One of the things that's kind of fun to watch is, over the years, Tutu's own criticism of himself for his lack of inclusive knowledge earlier in his career. Only those who have developed a passion for truth can ultimately be expected to become prophetic leaders, to speak out against unrighteousness and injustice and oppression without fear and favor. So in this quote, actually what you see, you know, it's directed, he's talking about it on an occasion that he has where he's charged with talking about theological education or education in general. But as you can see, the core truths important to him pop up again and again, whether it's in his sermons, his writings, in his role as pastor, as archbishop, whether it's in his addresses in small towns where there have been riots, whether it's funeral addresses, whether it's ordinations, whether it's sitting on the stage with world leaders and, for instance, trying to convince Queen Elizabeth to be as enthusiastic about a certain cause as what he is. I think, too, that if you have time to read some of his writings and what's written about him, what is striking is his vision, his thought, and his embodiment of ethical leadership. Coming from his background, where even as he became better known to the world and a world traveler and had the world stage, it was very important for him to maintain his touch with commonness, to see, in his instance, in his words, to see God in everyone and everyone reflecting God back to him, so that there was no hierarchy based on one's education, one's leadership roles, one's offices, and one's income. So it's very important to him. You could not be a leader without also being a servant all the time and at the same time. And so here are some pictures that capture that kind of participation, that kind of involvement, being in the heart of the struggle. Here he is at an event on apartheid. This happened to take place in New York. You see him with a t-shirt on, and he's right in the midst of the crowd. And then you see him with people. The Bopotong massacre was in South Africa in 1992. I think over 40 individuals were killed, and he was invited to do a communal funeral service there. He was among the people, and the people loved him. That was quite evident even at the time of his funeral, where there were throngs in the street. His ethics were rooted in his belief in the goodness of God's creation. If we are fundamentally good, we simply need to rediscover this true nature and act accordingly. One aspect of his theology that I think especially applies to some situations I've encountered in medical bedside ethics and across medicine actually, is in dire situations, lots of times it's in situations of utter devastation and of hopelessness, where someone gets a good idea and is inspired to either develop something or to say something helpful or come up with a new way, a refined way to address an ethical issue. I think that would have bothered Archbishop Tutu in that he preferred to not dwell in the devastation. By that, he didn't ignore it, but he focused his energy about, hey, this is the rainbow, this is good, this is light. There is light in everyone. In this particular situation, how do we get from this point of darkness, of hopelessness, of evil, of death, of whatever medical emergency we have, how do we get to where we want to be, where he would, in his words, where he would say, we are called to be love. We are called to be light. In all of his works, what you see is a strong elements of virtue ethics and strong elements of feminist ethics, and these, inform his diversity, equity, inclusion approaches as well. So about his leadership style, his leadership was transformative. It was definitely a form of servant leadership. It was inclusive. It was affirming of his coworkers. And I think that's an important point for us as ethicists and ethics consultants. How many times are we consulted, or are there problems in our healthcare systems because of just workforce issues, struggles, differences of opinions, affirming coworkers, even takes on new meaning now with COVID and with our levels of moral distress. But it also had a very disciplined side to it, including prayer and meditation and real dedication to the task. His humor was always just below the surface. Archbishop Tutu, I actually heard him speak a few times at DC other DC events when we lived in Alexandria. And the only way to describe his laugh was that he cackled. It was a very distinctive laugh, and everyone worldwide talked about it. That one of the keys to his appeal, to his being so beloved, was his humor. His courage in dangerous times was legendary. He affirmed people, he encouraged them, but he also could make his points very firmly. So also in ethics, and whether it's with families, with our coworkers, during consultations, in our endeavors as educators, we can sometimes struggle to find that balance between being encouraging and being affirming and being a cheerleader. But yet there are times when one must say, hey, I see an issue here. This is a corrective stance, or this is what I believe, or this is what the evidence says needs to be done to get from this quagmire to a safe harbor. So what I've tried to do here, and again, it's I'm just kind of at the start of trying to do some internal integration of a lot of different things in Tutu's writings myself. But these are some of the books that are out. Tutu was so busy doing and ministering in a practical way that, unlike many theological leaders, there's not as large a corpus of written work. But I think over time now you're going to see more and more people help us out with that, because they're going to remember his words. They're going to, I think, publish more correspondence. And those that knew and worked with him will be describing, bearing witness to what they experienced his work to be like in person. And I've only started to scratch the surface in terms of the wide applicability of Tutu and his ethics to the various ways that we can incorporate it into situations in bioethics. I leave you with this picture that I really love, that I think encapsulates a lot of who he was. This is in St. George's Cathedral. So this is like the home seat of where he was the Archbishop in Cape Town. And so you see here the large stained glass windows that are symbolic of the organized church, the Anglican Church. And then the choir dancing, celebrating, singing in, again, in a traditional setting, but from the heart, from the country, joyful. Tutu wanted to be remembered as being joyful and being forgiven. And here he is, just erupting into spontaneous dance and laughter. And that is one of the ways that he over and over again said that he wanted to be remembered. So thanks everyone for taking time out of your day to attend. And anytime you want to email me and give me your thoughts, your feedback, this is more of an ongoing discussion, I think.
Thank you, Dr. Dell. We do have a few moments if people have questions that they wanted to ask. Throw them in the chat or raise your hand electronically. question from Stanley Turman. What was his position on assisted suicide?
Yeah, that's one of those things, one of those little areas that's actually a big area that's a whole into. Basically, as I'm aware, he was for it in terms of, for a number of, he saw, his thought was that, again, coming from his place of faith, is that there are a lot worse things than death. And his vision of inclusivity and justice encapsulate or it incorporated dignity. And so I think that he made the jump from his Ubuntu theology, incorporating several of the Black liberation theologies, incorporating also his Anglican traditions. Again, he got his theological education in London. He actually ministered to at least one all-white church in London as a priest. He made the jump then from that background to his work that occurred in the state on the streets in terms of how do you take liberation theology and the efforts to get God's goodness appreciated and experienced by everyone in the apartheid area. That led him to, and this is my take on the evolution time-wise of his writings, to really value and appreciate the dignity of everyone. And so I see that his saying that certain situations of assisted suicide are acceptable as an extension of his embracing dignity for all people. If you could follow that line of reasoning over the years.
There was a follow-up to that. People I think are having to leave. It's 1 o'clock. Before we get too far into that, I wanted to thank you from both the Williams Lecture Series and from the program. Thank you so much for your presentation. If you have a few moments and people have further questions, I'm happy to keep things going. Otherwise, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
There was a follow-up question, which hang on. So was he committed to the work of interfaith dialogue and reconciliation between differing faith perspectives?
Oh yes, definitely. That was almost all that he was about. He would say, my background, my belief is this. He actually, his family of origin, he was a Methodist, and then he, as he got to be a young adulthood, he spent some time in churches that were more specifically Black denominations, and then his wife came from the Catholic tradition. He wound up an Anglican, but his position was that there are common virtues, and God is God, and this is his expression of God. Other people may know God in different expressions, but we can all see God in all of us. So of course we should love each other, and of course we should work together for these greater goods of human dignity, human rights, and equality.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, thank you so much. I think people have left so many wonderful comments that maybe you want to take a moment to read the chat. It's thank you so much for a wonderful talk, and I think you've inspired many people today.
Thank you for permitting me kind of a trial run on trying to pull some of these thoughts together for myself. I appreciate it. And blessings to all of you in all of your work as you go back to your students and to the people that you care for and care about. And thanks to Lynn for all the graciousness that has been extended to me during my time in New Orleans. Thank you.
And thank you everyone for attending. Please feel free to stay on our mailing list. We will let you know when the next sessions occur. Thank you all.